Owens here. Today I'm joined by Luke Thomas, one half of the award-winning Morning Combat and one of the finest minds in MMA today. Luke, always a pleasure to sit down and chat. How are things with you today?
Thank you. Yep, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
First question, Luke, because your football team and my football team have a little bit of an old rivalry in Liverpool and Real Madrid. If we were to take that onto the MMA field and have Ilia Topuria versus Paddy Pimblett, how would you fancy your team's
Yeah.
chances?
I mean, come on now. Let's be serious for just a second. Yeah, dude. I mean, what Ilia did is incredible. And then, that was the fight he got in the most trouble in was the Jai Herbert fight, which was
Mm,
at 155. But then, he also cut that dude in half. It looked like
mm,
it looked like he sliced him in half with a samurai
yeah.
sword that was so profound. So, yeah, I'll take Ilia in that one. No problem.
Well, I want to move you from past to present. I want to get you on and get some thoughts on the upcoming card on Saturday night, UFC 299. The big question I can see circulating on the internet at the moment is this everlasting debate seemingly between which is the better card, 299 or 300. So I'd like to get your thoughts. Which do you feel of those two cards is superior?
Mm. That's a tough one. I mean, I think 300's probably a better card, but 299 seems like a better party. Not
Mm,
sure how to explain that exactly. Like, but 299, it's in Miami, which obviously is contributing a little bit to that vibe. But I think in general, it just feels like, a little bit more. Listen, 299 doesn't have the same pressures to be anything. Like what does
mm,
299 have to be in terms of fulfilling the same kind of fan expectations that 300 does? Almost nothing. I mean, it's a pay-per-view, so it has to
mm,
look like a pay-per-view, but it's a really strong pay-per-view from top to freaking bottom for the most part. It just feels like people have any kind of grand expectation. Feels like 299 is like all gravy, whereas 300 there was like this massive
mm.
dissection. So I would probably still say the 300 card, but there are also fights on 299 that I like in some ways better than I like certain 300 fights. So, a bit of a mixed bag too.
299 is, I think, in most people's estimations, more stacked than your average pay-per-view. Do you at all buy into the theory that it has been stacked so much by the UFC to maybe inflate Sugar Sean O'Malley's perceived popularity?
I mean, I gotta be. I don't think the question is out of bounds.
Mm,
I've gotten this question now a couple of times, and it's kind of funny to hear to me. It's like, do you think the promoter is trying to put a lot of effort into a 20-something champion in the weight class in a very heavy-handed and obvious way so as to boost their fortunes? And it's like, yeah, I just, I
mm,
don't. What is the scandal? And it's like, oh well, this is favorable treatment. It's like, right, that is in fact the world in which we live. That certain people get more. I'm not declaring to you that you have to love Sean O'Malley. I'm not in any way suggesting that there isn't a conversation to be had about exactly how popular is he. I think
mm,
those are fair as well. Or is the UFC showing him what people might think is, hey, that attention could be put better potentially in other places? That's a debate you can have as well. But like,
mm.
as a guy who, again, I get sort of criticized at times for being perhaps too critical in UFC, I will tell you, them putting him at the top of a card and then making that card excellent, putting it in Miami, this sort of like newish but still really important market for them that they can do big numbers at. I don't, I don't see the scandal. This
Mm,
is what they kind of should be doing to an extent, or at
mm.
least getting behind certain kinds of champions. Maybe you think it should go to somebody else, but I'd rather see them do more than less, and this seems like more.
As you know, I was in Boston when O'Malley won the title. That was my first UFC event, so I don't have many events to kind of, you know, put that aside in many ways. But I will tell you that the atmosphere when O'Malley won the world title was similar to a Liverpool football match of 55,000 people for a 20,000 seater stadium. So, in your opinion, there is still a question mark, as you mentioned, about how big of a star O'Malley can become or how big of a star O'Malley is. In your opinion, what are the answers to both of those questions?
So I think that, certainly if you just look at what, perhaps even you could mention Dricus du Plessis and what he got out of South Africa,
Mm,
and then more recently what Ilia Topuria got out of Spain, there was this big, giant moment of embrace that these are smaller countries than the United States. The United States is obviously significantly bigger than them in many ways, and a very different place than both of them in many ways. But they at least had this like real turning point moment. And I'm not sure O'Malley has had that kind of thing yet. It doesn't look to me like that's, granted, he's a little bit more out there, so that might contribute to it, whereas the other guys seem a little bit more mainstream ready. Perhaps that is part of it as well. But I guess what I would say is there definitely was a time early on post-Contender Series where there was a lot of attraction around what he was doing. It was really important. And then he had the kind of the Cheeto loss. And remember, there was a time where he was out for a while with a USADA suspension. He was ultimately exonerated, but there was a moment there that he kind of lost. I think that, I'm not saying that derailed him. His popularity has only grown. He's got a very successful online properties that he plays with as well. But I am pointing out that somewhere along the lines, I see him as just a guy who just are his choices for me. They're not for me, but he's not making them for me. He's making them for him. And those are his. It doesn't matter. It's not for me, but I don't get offended that it's not in line with what I would prefer. I let people just be who they want to be. But there are definitely some perceptions out there now, not mine, but they exist, where they kind of see him as a try-hard, where he's doing too much to stand out too much. And there's actually a little bit of pushback to that now. In the end, I think what could fix that, honestly, if he just keeps winning, it's going to be really great for him. They're trying to give him here a rival. A rival also kind of elevates him a little bit to a degree as well, but it will probably take for him what it takes for a lot of pay-per-view stars, such they can become one, continued exposure under winning conditions. That really is the problem solver for everybody in the end, if you can get it.
Out of interest, and this conversation brings you back to a conversation I had with Jeremy Stevens, and I remember Jeremy complaining to me about how the American fans don't get behind their own in the way that, say, the Irish get behind their own, the English get behind their own fighters. I'm wondering if you think it's easy or difficult, if it's more difficult for an American fighter to become a supposed superstar, given the lack of maybe American push, if that makes sense.
I think there's definitely something to that, right? I don't think that's the craziest thing in the world. You can be an American superstar, but it would take a special set of conditions that you've seen at times. I mean, I think Randy Couture, Chuck Liddell achieved something in a different era, but pretty similar to that. It kind of felt like at the time when those guys were at the peak of their powers, they represented something along those lines. Again, different era of MMA, different weight classes, all different kinds of things. I mean, again, I would say like Sean O'Malley's strengths are in certain ways his weaknesses as well. He is a guy who has his own sort of style, his own way of doing things, his own command of his own life, his own way of making himself appear to the world, and the ways in which he moves through it. These are all decisions he makes to himself, but these don't necessarily cohere with wide swaths of the sporting world that we have here in the United States. You got to remember there's many, 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 many different kinds of sports here, both collegiate. There's women's softball World Series that gets aired here. There is, I mean, I saw bowling on FS2, and not granted that's sort of but it was collegiate bowling. It was like Oregon State versus whoever. I mean, the amount of different choices you have to capture something in the middle, you have to be somewhere closer to that middle. And I think that he has, by his own choices, put some distance between those things. I think you can kind of overcome that again if you do some really historic winning, but that, we shall see if he gets there.
You obviously mentioned the rivalry there he's going on against I believe it's his only career rematch in Marlon Chito Vera. There was a lot made of the whole mentally undefeated. I'm not taking the loss as an actual loss from O'Malley's side. I'm wondering if you feel like this rivalry, does Sean strike you as someone who will be affected by the previous fight, or do you think he will be able to erase that from his mind?
I don't think he'll be affected by the previous fight in that sense. No. And remember, it wasn't just that. The narrative of the first fight at the time the fight happened was that Sean O'Malley was physically brittle or physically not very durable. I don't feel like that allegation or that assessment of him has really followed him recently at all. It feels like he kind of moved. I mean, it was, we definitely did have that conversation at the time, but we haven't had it very much since. He kind of has seemingly overcome that. And so I think that should be noted, first of all. I guess I would point that out. But I honestly believe that O'Malley, like, there's no doubt in my mind O'Malley thinks he can win and is going to win. And the question about what he tells himself to get there, whether or not there is any truth actually associated with it in the real world, to me almost seems immaterial, The only thing that matters to him is what he believes and what powers him to the best possible version of what he can be. And so when people are like, "Oh, he's delusional," like, dude, I got news for you. I got news for you. They all are. They all,
Mm,
because you have to be. You can't
yeah.
do that job without telling yourself a lot of things. And sometimes those things are true, sometimes they're not. But if it's what powers you to your best self, in the end, I just wouldn't want to get in the way of
Mm,
that, if that makes sense.
yeah. There is some school of thought when we look at the two guys' styles and we look at O'Malley's fast starting style and maybe a question over his gas tank and Cheeto's slow starting style with obviously his build. I remember when he was fighting, as you know, my friend Rob Font, the question was Cheeto's finally getting that main event. He can finally show what he can do when he builds with those extra 2 rounds. It feels like there's a potential for a turning point in this fight. I'm wondering if you anticipate that and if what you think the likelihood of that will be.
I think that's exactly, again, there's any number of different scenarios that could
Of
play
course.
out. It does seem like one of the more probable scenarios is what you're describing, which is, to me, since their first fight, the guy who has made the more overall growth in their game, especially on the offensive side, would be Sean O'Malley. I do think Chito Vera has made some important progress. It's not to say it's a case of all or nothing, but I would say Sean has made more. Although you could still say some of those wins he had, for example, over Jan, very controversial.
Mm,
But the point I'm trying to make here is, I actually do think that Sean O'Malley is going to really find great opportunities to land on Cheeto, and I could bag rounds early, even middle way through the fight. But it's like, one of the things that really makes Cheeto is, great leg kicks, so he can invest in those. He does have, I think, better and improved defense, and also, just perhaps most importantly, the guy is very hard to hurt.
mm,
Very hard to hurt. He is hard to physically do something to where you make him react and make poor choices or otherwise challenge his consciousness. Like, you can't. He's hard. I mean, the guy went the distance with John Lineker and was right in his face. I mean, it's just
mm.
kind of crazy what he's capable of doing. So to me, it's like, again, it could be nip and tuck for long stretches, perhaps boring at times. Or if they're playing chess too much, I don't know. But I do feel like the longer the fight goes, such that it does, and you get in those fourth and fifth round territories, this is where Cheeto comes to life. You're really not even going to get the best of him until we get to that
Mm.
mark, to be quite honest. So that to me is, how does O'Malley now, if he can't get him out of there early, and it does go to these points, how is he going to navigate that space? That really, to me, is where the fight is probably going to be won or lost.
Assuming Sean O'Malley wins the title, as the odds makers suggest, do you feel like Merab is 100% next for him, or do you feel like we could see a similar situation where O'Malley and the UFC opt for a more of a storyline fight, i.e., potentially a bigger name in the bantamweight division who maybe might be a potentially easier task for
They
O'Malley?
could do that. I don't think they would do Ilia Topuria. That doesn't seem likely to me.
Mm,
One never knows, but probably unlikely. Probably
mm,
unlikely is the way I would put that. Um, I think so. There's a lot of excitement. I think Merab's stock has never been higher, both with the fans and with the company and in the sport itself.
mm,
Um, his win streak is what, 10 fights, whatever it is at this point. It's an incredible win streak. There's no one else he really needs to beat in front of him there's nothing else to prove in terms of becoming a top contender. I don't know how high the UFC is on that match. I mean, again, I think they're pretty high on it, but I don't think it's like a gigantic blinking priority for them
mm.
in that kind of way. So in the event that something really enticing pops up in an unexpected way, that could derail it. But short of that, I think Merab is probably your candidate. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Moving on to the co-main event, Dustin Poirier versus Benoit Saint-Denis. Benoit Saint-Denis, I had the chance of catching up with him a couple of weeks ago. Such an interesting character, as you know, with the military backstory and all what he's done in this very short time in his career. What have you made of his early UFC run for going from the slacking he took against Eliza Zaleski dos Santos to now this 5-fight finish streak? What has been your assessment of the early BSD run?
At first, I had some real reservations about him. Not that he didn't have a ton of fighting spirit. And then some of the stats are affected by one fight that went quite wrong with him, but he seemed just a little
Mm,
bit too raw, a little bit too hittable for me. Again, the fire in his belly is amazing. You
mm,
know what I mean? Like, his thirst for violence and competition and just asserting his will is extraordinary. And so that carried him to, and it always does, it carries him to incredible heights.
mm,
But he was just too unrefined a product. Like, those kinds of guys are exciting a lot to a lot of different fans in a lot of different ways. And I get that. But if you just fight with a technical deficiency that you try to overpower with will, and a fire in your belly, that will get you attention, but it does create a very hard limit about how good you'll get.
Mm.
And then in this last 3-fight stretch where he's got, I think, back-to-back-to-back finishes, including the last one over Frivola, he's looked a lot more refined. He's looked a lot more thoughtful about what he's trying to execute on, and smoother about blending everything and making it work for himself. There's a maturity that appears to be happening, and it makes sense. 28 years old, or right at the sort of beginning ish parts of his
Mm.
true physical prime, or smack in the middle of it, I should say, actually. And I think that, combined with the developing part of his game, and the amount you see develop between fights, right?
Mm.
Like, there's no real set pace. No one really has a what does good development look like. Some guys are better than others, some take longer, but sometimes they eventually get there. His development appears to be happening. I'm like, I'm a guy who, when I was doing the MK shows around some of his early fights, I'd be like, well, I don't know,
Mm.
but the level of technical maturity has kind of made me dial some of that back, and now I'm actually pretty excited. Also, just deserves to be noted, like, before he and Dustin Poirier ever compete on Saturday, Poirier, 35 years old, coming off of a head kick knockout in July. Like, these are
Mm.
not, this is not championship fights, so I'm not trying to bring the stat in here where it doesn't belong, but I am just sort of pointing out there's a lot of things, wind at the back of BSD, headwinds for
Mm.
Poirier, and that, I suspect we'll see some evidence of that on Saturday.
I was going to ask you about that because just playing devil's advocate, in a similar vein, this feels similar to Justin Gaethje versus Rafael Fiziev back in March in terms of
Mhm.
the old guard being given the test of the new challenger. Obviously, Fiziev couldn't pass that test back last year. Obviously, that was also a 3-round fight, so it's worth noting. But do you feel like Benoit Saint-Denis needs to show something that he previously hasn't in order to get over the line against Dustin Poirier?
So, so yes and no. The individual parts of what I think he needs, I've seen flashes of throughout the
Mm.
course of his fights. I mean, I expect some technical development here, but in general, I think he's got good enough striking, not to beat Poirier, flat out, but if you're mixing in wrestling and it's grinding affair, and you're sneaking in shots from the tight waist and then
Mm.
along the fence line and then everything else, that kind of thing. I think he can win. We have seen him show incredible resiliency when he's been in trouble. I think he's going to need both of those things.
Mm.
We're going to need to see both the technical maturation that he has worked on, as well as it's gut check time. Poirier is 35, but he's dangerous and powerful and experienced, and no doubt about it, has been in this position very, very many times. And BSD at times has been hittable. He is not. Again, he's gotten much, much better at it over time, but these are things the tape is there, and it does count to some extent. So to me, you're like, this is a huge moment for Benoit Saint-Denis, right?
Mm.
Especially for being so far back in the rankings, to have someone this far up. I mean, they're pushing him quickly.
Mm.
He is going to need all of that fire in his belly, that ferocity, and he is going to need to be smart and make good choices and have a good game plan and all those kinds of things. It's going to be both of those that get you past a name like Dustin Poirier. Dude, Dustin Poirier finished Eddie Alvarez, finished Conor McGregor, beat him twice,
Mm.
finished Justin Gaethje, and then finished who am I forgetting
Anthony
here?
Pettis.
Uh, yeah, I could go on and on.
Mm.
Like, did all Michael Chandler, finished Michael
Mm.
Chandler, did all of these things, got an interim title. That's as good as a career gets without winning a
Yeah.
UFC belt.
Yeah.
Period. Like,
Yeah.
it just doesn't get that. That's who you're dealing with here. So you're just not going to do that on, like, will.
Yeah.
Skill has got to be just as critical. So let's see if he can keep building on that development.
Is this a must-win fight for Dustin Poirier in terms of I mean, certainly in terms of his title aspirations, it would be a big, big step back. But in terms of Dustin, the star that we've come to know and love in Dustin, would this be is a must-win?
No, it's not must win as a star. I mean, it's must win as a, hey, can you headline, or
Mm.
could you headline a pay-per-view for us in the future? Are you in that kind of space?
Mm.
There are some consequences there, but no, as like a fan favorite, no, this would not. I remember years and years and years when, after Kimbo Slice, and I'm not comparing Dustin Poirier to Kimbo Slice, but it's an illustrative of a fact,
Mm.
which is, I remember when Kimbo Slice was in Elite XC, and then everything fell apart, and he did boxing and it didn't go that well. And then he kind of came back to MMA, and then you would go to these arenas and they'd be like packed out to see this dude. You look at the numbers on Spike TV, dude. I've said this before. Kimbo Slice is the most popular fighter in Bellator history. It's Kimbo Slice. He would do 3 million viewers on. They were doing 300,000 if they were lucky on Paramount Network. They were doing 3 million plus with Kimbo. And I remember thinking, like, dude, like a fan's love affair with a fighter. And again, that was a very different case than Poirier, but a fan's love affair with a fighter, this dies hard.
Yeah.
It takes a long time for that to go away. And sometimes it never really does. So no, a loss here would not be really all that substantial to those other considerations. But in terms of title aspirations, you're losing to a guy outside the top 10. Yeah, that would be real bad.
Yeah. Michael Venom Page makes his eagerly anticipated UFC debut. What are your expectations for the MVP experience in the UFC?
Yeah, not much. I have very low expectations, and that sounds like I'm being like unnecessarily harsh, but I'm really not. 36 years old, so he is where he is. He missed his athletic prime for his other choices that he made in his professional career. And again, I think you can decide how well those worked out. I think most of them did. Sorry, my little one's trying to get in here. But what I would say is he probably he has a unique game, and I think what he's probably believing, and what the UFC is probably believing is, look, the prime is over. But if we match this dude correctly, could we get a guy who, at least for 3 or 4 fights, maybe more, but look, at least that, can we get a guy who is just going to be an action fighter for us and can help deliver us in the UK market, which we know he already did for Bellator. And we can just we can plug this guy in anywhere, and fans will be like, hell yeah, and then you can lead with him to some extent in the UK. I think that's absolutely what you can get out of this. Like, Michael Venom Page could have the very last chapter of the most relevant portion of his career. Dude, fighting fucking Mike Perry and bare knuckle is tough. And bare knuckle doesn't have the same kind of platform UFC does. He could still have a really memorable fight, win or lose, but make a big splash with the fans. And I think it'd be a big hit for everybody. I mean, just going there and being like, is the title on there? Guys, he's at welterweight and he's 36. Probably not, right? That's probably dude. Shavkat Rakhmonov is in this division. Jack Della Maddalena is in this division. No, I don't think it's very realistic to expect a title fight. But could you expect a guy who hasn't fought in the UFC before to maybe shake things up a little bit and make them fun and give some fireworks? I think that's very much on the table. So let's see what he does.
Is Petr Yan the best fighter in history to go on a 4-fight losing streak?
No. I'm sure BJ Penn had a 4-fight losing streak.
In that part of their career, if to caveat the question.
Oh, like sort of like still close to the middle-ish part of it?
In the prime, let's say.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe. Yeah. But, first of all, he got a win in there, the win over Corey Sandhagen, right? Also, I wasn't convinced that he lost. I didn't think he lost the O'Malley fight. I thought he won that one. And I think the TJ Dillashaw fight, I think he also won, or maybe that was the Sandhagen one. Sandhagen and Dillashaw. I can't remember.
Do you mean the Sterling fight, the Sterling rematch?
No, I'm thinking of Corey Sandhagen and some of the guys he's fought. I apologize. I'm saying I definitely feel like he should have beaten Sean O'Malley. So rather than being 1-4, it would be 2-3,
Yeah.
But still, 3 fights like that, dude, bantamweight is fucking brutal. And I saw Henry Cejudo this week being like, I didn't want to go out the way that I did against Merab, which I understand. But at the same time, it's like, dude, this is 135 pounds. Like, the amount of difficulty you're going to experience aging is exponential. It's not arithmetic, it's exponential. Like, every year it gets significantly worse as a sort of prospective ability to return things to form. Yeah, it sucks, and it's an unusual thing for Jan, but I'm not in any way surprised or downgrading him too much from it, because it's 135 pounds.
Yeah. Last question from me, Luke, and as always, I appreciate your time. I want to move the conversation slightly away from 299, slightly from some of the fights into some. I want to get your thoughts on some news that related to Bloody Elbows updates over the last couple of days. Obviously, sacking virtually all of their staff, or certainly the senior members, removing a lot of their work from the site and giving this kind of clean slate, let's say, at the expense of some of their writers. I want to give you the opportunity and to kind of prick your brains on what is a very sensitive topic and point of conversation for people like you and I.
Yeah, I mean, this is a real bad day for MMA. I know that there's probably folks who don't see it that way. I would very much submit that they are not understanding what is happening around them. Um, the biggest complaint that I typically see about Bloody Elbow comes from people who didn't like their political sort of editorial slant, which is fine in the sense that like you don't have to like that. I don't think objecting to that by itself is an out of bounds criticism. But what I would respond to with the question is, all right, so show me the site or the media outlet that does what they do in the sense of trying to police the industry, trying to hold commissions to account, trying to hold fighter pay to, make it available to public scrutiny. These kinds of, I can go on and on.
Mm,
What other media outlet does that kind of thing as what they do, but has politics more favorable to what the critic might prefer? And the answer is there isn't one.
mm,
There fucking isn't one. Now, I don't know exactly what the reason for that might be, but I think people should probably reflect on the fact that that's a real thing. For example, I can sort of say, hey, if you don't like the Onion's political satire, you can go and check out the Babylon Bee. There is a genuine alternative. But in this particular case, there is no other alternative trying to hold power to account in the industry from an alternative politics. I think people need to just reconcile that fact right away. And that sort of changes the debate very, very quickly, in my view, because once you understand that they're the only ones basically doing what they're doing, it doesn't mean that individual stories, editorial posture, or any other number of things you could point to aren't criticisms or things to be unhappy about, or generally things that they may have gotten wrong over time.
mm.
That's not my point. My point is, show me the media outlets from a range of different political worldviews that have the same kind of critical mission, which is, from our perspective, we're going to hold power to account in the industry, and there isn't fucking any other than them. So if they're going away, this is categorically a disaster for the industry. Now, there are going to be people in the industry who are going to be really happy about this because they benefit from the current situation,
Mm.
and they didn't like that Bloody Elbow had kind of critical coverage of their oversight. But it just goes to show you that the amount of bad faith actors in the industry, it's so endemic in management, in how fighters get paid, in commission structures. These things are so endemic that it's basically how the sport works. And that's why you see sometimes some of these really angry reactions to what they did, because they were the only ones who had the courage to hold a mirror up and let everyone see what was going on. They will be sorely missed. This is a very bad thing for the industry, unless you're a dirtbag, in which case, congratulations, things just got a lot easier for you.
People like, for people like, I feel like it's an industry where we're never 100% assured of our position. As someone who's trying to break in still in my own position, still not full time. As you obviously moved between different sites and obviously done what you've done with Morning Combat. In terms of an outlet, in terms of somewhere for people to actually work in the industry and actually produce quality work, as opposed to, for lack of a better phrase, the clickbaity headlines that draw people in. How, in terms of an actual MMA writers or reporters perspective, how bad of a kind of move is this?
Bad, but I mean, this is something of a different conversation.
Mm,
But um, I mean, I've been saying this before. Like, okay, so the way it worked is post 2005, everybody, and it wasn't just media who wanted it. Obviously, media selfishly wanted it, but it was sort of seen as an achievement once Fox Sports starts covering MMA, because back then you would have these pay-per-views happening all the time and you couldn't get any mainstream media outlet to cover anything. And so it was a victory if CBS started writing about it. It was a victory
mm,
if, at the time, AOL or Yahoo or any of these sort of big telecom slash media places, it was seen as a big victory to get those kinds of things. But now many of those jobs are gone. And on top of it, I think that kind of job in general is dying and going away, both in MMA and across sports more generally. And so losing Bloody Elbow significantly adds to that. But that to me is part of a bigger conversation about what have Google and Facebook done to media, certainly, and
mm,
not just independent media, because it's affected corporate media too, but but specifically independent media. What chaos have they enforced on the world? And in Facebook's case, taking up all the ad money, Google as well. But in Google's case, how search has transformed how content is created, and then who and how winners get sorted. and not just in basic search engine optimization, but significantly more than that, like categorically how the algorithm works and who it favors. They have destroyed the media economy in this. And I know what everyone says. They're going to say, "Oh, a certain writer I didn't like is losing their job, and I'm not going to miss their coverage." Yeah, fine. Let me give you a clear as fuck warning as I possibly can. However little you like the current system, trust me when I tell you, you're going to hate the next one a lot more, because it's going to be significantly more unreliable for all the things that you thought went wrong. And again, it's not to say that those criticisms at times didn't hold a significant amount of weight. They do. You have to reconcile with the fact that sometimes the public has clear, absolute mandate of being mad at the media for various failures. Let me assure you what comes next is worse.
Yeah.
Make no mistake about it. Remember this conversation. You will see it.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I just wanted to, get your thoughts on that, because I do know that that's an issue that's close to your heart and something that you do champion. Luke, thank you as always for your time. I really do enjoy these chats. It feels like they're becoming more and more regular as well, which is always nice. So thank you as always for the time, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, bro. Appreciate it.
Make sure to subscribe to the LowKick MMA YouTube channel for all the latest news, event previews, and interviews with some of the biggest stars in MMA.